Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Beatles Forever. In our last episode of The Beatles Forever, we learned about Brian's early years and how it shaped him as a person. So I can't wait to find out what happens next, so let's see now. During the 1950s, there was a consumer boom in electrical goods, television sets, washing machines, and cheaper radios. Harry decided to expand into this profitable arena. He rented premises in Great Charlotte Street and named them NIMS. It was an abbreviation for North End Music Stores, which had been an offshoot of the first furniture shop in Walton Road. Brian was in charge of the record department. Brother Clive ran the electrical and domestic goods section, and Brian was enthusiastic. He guided the record division into profitability so quickly that Harry was moved to expand even further. A second NIMS shop with 3 floors opened at 1214 Whitechapel. From Lewis's record department, Brian recruited Peter Brown to manage the Great Charlotte Street shop, and he in turn would handle the Whitechapel operation. There was a large crowd at the opening. It was advertised in the Liverpool Echo, and they had Anthony Newley, the singer, perform there. NIMS at Whitechapel was an instant success. Brian insisted on staff courtesy, and his house rule was that no customer should leave dissatisfied. Within a year, it was the best-run record store in the North. Burl Adams, an employee, stated that Brian was a lovely boss and a perfect gentleman. She said he was immaculate and always looked like he had come out of a shower. The staff called him Mr. Brian. His brother was Mr. Clive, and their father, Mr. Harry. When his career in the theater didn't work out, Brian decided to get closer to the world of pop music. Brian had a love of classical music, too. He would reserve the finest seats for his weekly visit to the Liverpool Philharmonic, and he began a friendship with the conductor, John Pritchard. Around this time, Brian met a Jewish girl named Sonia Selgeson. She was 16. She wasn't good at school and left school at 15 to pursue a stage career. They were a couple for 2 years. He was 20 at that time. It ended in tears for both of them. She never had a boyfriend before Brian, and she was fascinated by him at the start. He had immaculate manners, and he made a girl feel good. Brian gave her chocolates or flowers on most meetings, and she got Christian Dior perfume on her 17th birthday. He gave her an album by their mutual favorite, Marlene Dietrich, at the Café de Paris, London, and Sonia's mother liked her choice of a man. And one day, Brian acted strange. Sonia's mother had made them a picnic lunch to take to Hoylake Beach. All of a sudden, he stood up and said he wanted to go home. She thought she had done something wrong and was hurt. But he said no, he just wanted to go home. He was restless, and he didn't want to explain why. On many weekends, he would go to Paris, and he told her he had friends there. She saw him as committed. To her, thought there was a solitary streak in him. When she went on a holiday cruise with her parents, he asked her if she behaved herself, and she asked, "What do you mean?" innocently, and he asked her if she had misbehaved, and she said she didn't. He also didn't like it when she went to Liverpool clubs without him. She told him she went with 2 girlfriends, and she thought he was possessive rather than jealous. Brian introduced her to his parents, and she became very fond of Queenie. She didn't think that Clive liked her because she had very long blonde hair, heavy makeup, and dangerous clothes. Not the normal clothes that a nice Jewish girl in Liverpool wore in those days. She didn't think he understood her character. She liked Brian's mother, and she was protective of him. And Brian's father showed her great warmth, and she felt at ease with him, and she got along better with males than females. Sonia was serious with her love for Brian. She adored him. He was frustrated working in the family store, and he was making the best of it. And their theater going, they did that as a hobby together. Brian, though he liked to drink too much, one time when he was drinking, he asked her to marry him. She was overjoyed but confused, and she wondered if it was drink talking. And the next morning he called her. He said, "I was very serious when I proposed to you last night," but he thought that they should take things easy at a steady pace. Sonia felt that they loved each other. This was the time when Brian had decided to go to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts. And driving her home one night, he parked the car outside her house and said they would have to stop seeing each other. He said there was no future in their friendship. And Sonia was dumbfounded and said, "You're obviously going out with another woman." And he said, "No." He told her, "I've got to tell you the truth. I'm going out with another man." And they both cried, and he explained his life, and he said he had to put his cards on the table. Though he loved her, he couldn't be with her. He broke down and cried a lot. Sonia, she was heartbroken. She never had a boyfriend before, and she thought he was heterosexual, and he didn't act effeminate, and she had looked up to him. Sonia went on to be successful in the world of theater, and Brian went off to RADA and to discover the Beatles, and they would communicate by letter for another year. In 1963, they met by chance at the Adelphi Hotel. He said to her, "You're more beautiful than ever, Sonia," and he asked her if she was happy. Sonia fixed him with a strong stare and a piercing reply, "What do you think?" His eyes rarely left her during the evening, and she said, even though there was bitterness in their parting, the magnetism remained. It was the last time she saw him. She said it was one of the happiest times in her life when she was with Brian, and she felt like that he never really left her, and that she feels his presence all the time. Most nights when Brian finished work, he would go for a drink on the way home, sometimes to the Beehive, most often to Bassnett Bar. Liverpool had several pubs where homosexuals gathered: the Magic Clock, the Spinning Wheel, Ma Boyle's, the Old Dive, and for class and atmosphere, the Bassnett was the place to go. They had oysters and smoked salmon, complementing the drinks, and Brian would go there 4 to 5 times a week. A club owner named Yankel said that Brian didn't mind being homosexual, but he did feel pressure being Jewish. He was a reluctant Jew. In 1960, there was an advertisement for a sales assistant in the record shop in Liverpool, and it said applied to Brian Epstein. So Alistair Taylor was bored working in a timber company. Taylor impressed Epstein with his knowledge of jazz and pop, his orderly manner, and his open enthusiasm. The job was his, but Brian thought that Alistair was too mature for the wages and offered him a job as his personal assistant instead. He would help Brian to order records, pick up his briefcase, as well as helping out at the sales counter when they were busy. Taylor accepted immediately, and he joined the best record department in the northwest of England, perhaps the country. Brian created ambiance. In the classical department, he displayed potted plants, and there were private booths with chairs for listening to samples of his new records. Downstairs in the pop section, the listening facilities were more sparse, with open-hooded plastic-top booths. His staff was amazed on Brian's forecast of what would sell and what would stick. He has a sensitive musical ear. Taylor would say they should order another box of an album that was selling steadily, and Brian would say, "No, no, no, that will just tick over now. Order no more." Brian agreed to sell the Mersey Beat newspaper in his store and was surprised at how well it sold. Brian didn't get much profit from it, but it was curious at what was going on. The editor told Brian that in Liverpool, the beat groups were now exactly like what happened to jazz in New Orleans at the turn of the century. The editor then said, "Everything is happening here like nowhere in the world." Epstein said, "You're joking," and Bill Harry, who was the editor of the Mersey Beat, said he wasn't joking. And they were going to publish a list showing that there were 280 beat groups in Liverpool. It's unique. Mersey Beat's front page story on July 20th, 1961, headlined Beatles signed recording contract, and there was a picture of the Beatles in Hamburg, and they signed a contract to make 4 records per year in Germany for producer Bert Kaempfert on the Polydor label. Brian asked if he could review records in the newspaper, and Bill thought it would be good because it would give the newspaper credibility. Brian's first reviews concentrated on his own preferences, showed music from such musicals as Anthony Newley's Stop the World, I Want to Get Off, and The Music Man. He also did a few classical recordings. Harry was shocked that there was no pop music. He thought, my God, he just doesn't know what's going on. Bill talked to Brian about it, and they agreed that he should concentrate on pop. Brian's second column touched on new songs by Elvis Presley and Chubby Checker, and he continued to do a comprehensive summary of prominent names like Roy Orbison, The Shadows, Duane Eddy, and Jasmine Acker-Bilt. Brian asked where the Beatles could be seen, and Harry said that they were frequently at the Cavern, a local cellar club. Brian heard the Beatles by name, and he was interested on the business prospect of them. October 28, 1961, a young man walked into Nims and asked Brian if he had a record at the store by the Liverpool group called the Beatles, and Brian said no, he would look into it. And then he wrote on a memo, "The Beatles, my Bonnie, check on Monday." He checked at the record company catalogs, nothing there. In the next few weeks, the staff had two other requests for a record by the Beatles. The boy who had asked Brian the question in the first place was named Raymond Jones. He returned to the store and asked, "Any luck yet with my Beatles record?" And Brian said he had no luck. Brian asked for more details, and Raymond said it was a German record. Brian said that was a useful lead. He got Alistair Taylor to help him search through the catalogs again. Brian thought that the Beatles might be German, so he called the Deutsche Grammophon, a major record company in Hamburg. The record man said no, they didn't know a Beatles record, but they were distributing a record by a Liverpool group. The title was called My Bonnie, and the group was named Tony Sheridan and the Beat Brothers. The musicians were the Beatles, and the German record men renamed them the Beat Brothers. Epstein and Taylor were sure that this was the right record, and Epstein said they would take a box, which was 25 singles. Brian had confidence that he had something important, and he wrote a handwritten note on the front window, "Beatle records available." Raymond Jones got his copy, and the other 24 were bought within an hour. The NIM staff were flabbergasted. Taylor that day called the German company and asked for 2 more boxes. Within 3 days, those 50 copies were sold. Epstein wanted to find out more about this freak record. Bill Harry said that Brian wanted to make out that he single-handedly created the Mersey scene and that nothing happened before he discovered it. It sounds dramatic, but it's rubbish. The Liverpool scene was flourishing long before he knew about it. Harry then said that Brian never knew about the My Bonnie record before Raymond Jones came into his shop, and that was theatrical license. Bob Willer was plugging the record locally, and the Beatles had taken a copy from Hamburg, and they gave Harry a copy too. With 5,000 Mersey Beat readers aware of the record on July 20th and asking for it at various shops, it was inconceivable that Epstein had not heard of the Beatles' popularity before October 28th. Bill said that Brian smelled the Beatles from the Mersey Beat. He was inquisitive and wanted to know what was going on. He added, how could Brian not know what was going on the cover of every issue of the Mersey Beat from the start of the summer? Bill told Brian that the Beatles appeared at lunchtime most days at the Cavern, and it was a cellar club just a 3-minute walk from Brian's Whitechapel shop. Brian said, "Do you think you could arrange for me to go down there?" And Bill said, "Certainly." He would tell the man at the door at the club to let him in. Brian asked Alistair to go with him to the club, stating that the Beatles were playing there and that they were from Liverpool. The Cavern was a dark basement. November the 9th, 1961 at 12:30 p.m., they arrived. Epstein and Taylor were dressed in their usual style of white shirts, dark ties, and business suits. They strolled across and paid the 1 shilling admission charge and went down the 18 steps. They sat on hard wooden chairs at the back of the cellar, in the middle, facing the stage. Epstein and Taylor looked like fish out of water around the girls with beehive hairdos, junior secretaries, and young men who were hardcore rock and roll fans. The air was damp and vile and stale with cigarette smoke, which Brian hated. There wasn't a glass of chilled white wine or a sandwich in sight. The teenagers were eating cheese balls, bowls of soup, lemonade, or tea. Brian had been to pubs and clubs in Liverpool, but he had never mixed with teenagers. To Alistair Taylor, the Cavern as a pop club was unspeakable. He detested pop music, though he didn't mind selling the records on the job. Taylor was there because Brian didn't want to be in a place like that on his own. Brian thought the Beatles were sensational. Brian, though, was used to orchestras and theater, and he thought on stage they were undisciplined. They smoked as they played, they drank Coca-Cola from bottles, and between songs they mocked one another and the teenagers who were their audience. Paul said they would perform a song that he and John had written called "Hello, Little Girl," and it was Brian's first clue that they could write songs. And they could also do ballads and fast songs. Taylor said he thought they were bloody awful, and yet they were incredible. Taylor said they were scruffy and loud and weren't good musicians, but their soul hit you in the chest, and Brian was transfixed. Taylor and Epstein sat through 5 songs, and then Brian wanted to talk to them. The band room was a little more than a large cupboard next to the stage. Inside was John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Pete Best. Harrison said, "What brings Mr. Epstein here?" Then Epstein and Taylor went to a proper lunch at the Peacock in Hackens Hay. Brian asked Alistair what he thought, and Alistair said they were fabulous, incredible, very exciting. Brian said he was thinking of managing them, and Brian asked Taylor, "If I do manage, do you want to work for me, or do you want to work for NIMS?" Taylor said, "What a funny question. I work for you, Brian." And Brian said that if he did manage them, he would set up a separate company, and he asked Taylor if he would go with him, and he said yes. So I'm going to end the video here. In this episode, we saw Brian being very successful in the family business. It challenged Brian, and he liked it. Brian had a girlfriend for 2 years, but realized the relationship wasn't going to work for him, and he told her the truth of his sexual preferences. Brian didn't mind being homosexual, according to a gay club owner, which I found surprising because Brian always seemed to be miserable about it in other sources that I've read. And the owner of the club also said that Brian was more upset about being Jewish. Another interesting thing that came up was when Bill Harry, who had a newspaper called the Mersey Beat, asked Brian if he could sell his paper in Brian's store. Brian said yes, and then saw the publication was selling out quickly. And he learned about the Mersey Beat and soon heard about the Beatles. He got their records and sold them at the store, and then decided to go see them perform at the Cavern. It was there that he had thoughts of managing them. Brian wasn't afraid to challenge himself. He did that by trying different things, and since he had success in the family business, he was ready to start something new, and then came the Beatles. I can't wait to see what happens next that we may not know about. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up or comment, it will help my channel to keep growing, and I really would appreciate it. Once more, I created a list of merchandise from Amazon that I thought you might be interested in. If you click on the link, it takes you to the Amazon page, and if you purchase anything, I get a small commission. That's of no extra cost to you. More importantly, I want to wish everybody a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of The Beatles Forever. Thank you. Bye.